Welcome to GardenDC, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine, and we're aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 147 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with Lois J. Vries, Executive Director of the Sustainable Gardening Institute and Library, about sustainable gardening practices. The plant profile is on Golden Ragwort, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with Dr. Allan Armitage, who returns to share the last word on Annual Plant Snobs. This episode, we're joined by Lois Vries, Executive Director, Sustainable Gardening Institute and Library. Welcome, Lois.
Hi, Kathy. It's great to be with you today. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak with your listeners about the Sustainable Gardening Library.
Well, it's great to have you, and we've known each other for, I'm going to say, well over a decade. We're both members of GardenComm, used to be known as the Garden Writers Association.
Right. I've especially enjoyed the Region 2 meetings in the Delmarva area.
So for those listeners, the Garden Communicators Association is divided up into regions, and there's an international region, of course, but our region of the Mid-Atlantic is basically New Jersey through DC, and we're a close-knit region. We get together, hopefully we try to once or twice a year and have local garden tours and meetups, and so we get to know each other pretty well over the years and get to see some pretty gorgeous gardens, right, Lois?
That's right.
So before we dive into your project, Sustainable Gardening Institute, let's talk a little bit about you and your background. And on the podcast, we like to ask, are you a green thumb? Were you born with chlorophyll in your veins?
Well, that's hard to say. I've killed my fair number of plants, but haven't we all? My grandparents had a garden, and that was very early urban type of setting. I grew up in Jersey City, and my grandmother had a garden. My grandparents owned an apartment house that we lived in, and the backyard, one half of it was a rose garden. That was my grandmother's thing, and the other half of it had plants that over time I grew to hate, which was hydrangeas and lily of the valley. But I got over that, so I have plenty of hydrangeas here now.
And why did you hate that section of the yard?
I think because grandma's flowers were so much prettier, and hydrangeas back then were not what they are today. The snowball bushes, I just didn't like them. I don't know.
I can see that. Maybe they were sticks for about half the year.
Right.
And so when did you get into horticulture or garden communicating?
Oh my, Kathy, that's a long and winding road. So the combination for me, environmental interest, environmental sciences, and I don't really call myself a horticulturist because I don't have formal training in that subject matter, but I loved gardening, and I had a fortuitous meeting at the American Society of Journalists and Authors conference one year with one of the editors of a national gardening magazine group. And I have a funny story about that. My job as a field editor was to go out, find gardens to have someone come in and photograph and interview the people and then do a write-up for the magazines. And one of the first gardeners I visited had drained a swampy area in his yard and diverted a stream. And at the time, I was chair of my environmental commission. And I don't know how much you know about this, but um, this is maybe like 10, 15 years ago. The state Department of Environmental Protection put out every 2 weeks a list of violations and the locations of the violations. And, there was constant penalties for people who did things like this. So at the time I was on my environmental commission, and I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? It was very conflicting because here I was on, one of my very first outings, and here was a guy with 2 violations. And I thought for a moment and I said, so when did you do this? And he said 1970 something or another. And I thought, home free, the stormwater management rules in New Jersey didn't go into effect until the 1980s. So I thought, okay, you don't have to do anything about this. But it really brought home to me how little many homeowners know about the environment and sustainable landscape practices, even though they know a lot about gardening.
Interesting. And so, what brought you to start the online gardening library and the institute?
Oh, Kathy, that's another very long story.
Well, we're here to listen to it, Lois.
So, while I was on the Environmental Commission, I had the opportunity to commission some GIS maps for zoning, conservation easements, and our open space plan. And, these were early days doing electronic mapping as opposed to creating paper maps. And I didn't know how to do it, obviously, but I actually hired somebody from the Nature Conservancy to do this for us. And, I was just fascinated by the result of being able to see so much information about we have a very environmentally sensitive ecosystem, a variety of ecosystems in our town. And so that kind of stuck with me. And then later on, when I started doing the gardening work, as you may know, we had the sustainability committee in GardenComm, and we were working on a project. The sustainability committee vetted the articles that were written on sustainability for our newsletter. And we were having a particularly difficult time with one of those articles. And so I started doing my own research online. And what I found was every single blog, article, reference that I could find in like the first 10 to 15 pages on Google was all just people copying from other people, copying from other people, copying from other people, the same information. And when I dug a little deeper, what I found was that all of that information was coming from the same place. And, I don't want to name any names or anything like that, but it was a group that was specifically paid to promote, we'll just say, a product. And
Hmm.
so that was very disturbing. And, I'm a big believer in uh, the subconscious works. We don't know what's going on in there. And, we kind of killed the article. I didn't think very much more about it, except, that I was frustrated. And evidently, my subconscious was doing all kinds of work without me knowing anything about it. And one day I literally woke up and I said, what we need is a sustainable gardening library. And that's literally how the library came to be. It was one of these things, I wouldn't call it an epiphany, but, a flash of insight where all of a sudden I saw the whole thing. And what the whole thing is the ability to show on a map locations of providers of information about sustainable landscape practices, beneficial insects, soils, water conservation, composting, all the usual suspects of sustainable gardening by their location, superimposed on a USDA plant hardiness zone map. Now, we're getting a little nerdy here. um,
Hmm.
Obviously, it's not for somebody who just bought a house and has no idea about gardening. This is a little, people need to be a little bit more interested either in environmental issues or serious. It's for serious gardeners.
Hmm. And so, out of that epiphany of needing this service because you weren't able to find that actual information, that's where it was born. And so, before we dive into more about the library and what people can find there and how they could use it, let's talk a little bit about where you garden and the town you refer to. So, you are in Lafayette, New Jersey. And for those listeners who are outside the Mid Atlantic, maybe listening from overseas, can you describe your climate, your growing zone, and actually also what you grow in your garden?
Well, that's another long and winding story. Technically, we're supposed to be in zone 6B, but we're not. Excuse me, 6A. We're actually in hardiness zone 5B, and nobody's ever going to convince me otherwise. Um, and we're in the northwesternmost corner of New Jersey, right where the three states of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York all meet up together. And our climate is, temperate. We have very humid summers, much more so since global warming and all of the climate issues have been happening. We've had some seriously wet summers in the last few years, contrary to even our neighbors, down around the Philadelphia area and even southern New Jersey, where they, had some drought warnings last year. So that's kind of what the weather's like here. And usually we have snow. We can have 3 feet of snow in one fell swoop, but we had hardly any this past winter. It's been a very warm winter.
Hmm. Yeah, same here down in DC. We got skipped by the snow, but I am not complaining about that. So I was very happy with our winter overall. And what do you grow in your home garden? Do you grow edibles as well as ornamentals?
Well, Dan built me some raised beds, and I have attempted to grow veggies in those in the past, mostly tomatoes, like everyone else. There's nothing like the tomato you grow yourself, even if if it costs $50 for each tomato. They taste so much better than what you can get at the store. But I've been migrating more towards fruits, and the last few years, we've been able to get a few blueberries, some strawberries, and this year I'm doing an experiment. I've bought a Juliet dwarf cherry bush and one of those fruit cocktail trees. Are you familiar with those, Kathy?
Yeah, I call those the Frankenstein trees. So they're the ones that, you have one arm that might be a pear or an apple or different kinds of fruit on different ones or different varieties of the same fruit, right?
Right. And I bought one for stone fruits, so it's apricots, plums, and peaches, and I think a nectarine. Um, they're not a true Frankenstein in that they're not GMO, but they're
Hmm.
peculiar. They're grafted trees,
Yeah. Like,
So
collected parts from other bodies is how I'm picturing a Frankenstein in that case, and you referred to Dan, and we should let our listeners know who Dan is.
well, I usually refer to him as the under gardener. He's my better half and official hole digger. And I have to say, he's learned a lot about gardening in the time that the 30 years we've been together. So he started out where, oh God, I couldn't let him even pull weeds because out came my hibiscus plant, like, no, no. One time he did pull a purple plum hibiscus out and threw it away. And when I realized it was gone, um, I was like, "Where did you put it? Where did you put it?" And we went to the pile and dug it out and was able to actually rejuvenate it by getting it back in the hole. So
Nice. Well, I'm
yeah,
glad that was a happy ending, and yeah, we could probably do a whole episode on spouses or partners or, life mates who aren't gardeners, and those who are gardeners, and what it's like to garden with each other in both situations, because they both have their pros and cons, right? Even
yeah.
if they were somebody who loved gardening, that might still be the difficulty there. Hmm. So, steering us back to the sustainable gardening library, let's talk about how a serious home gardener would use it and access it.
Well, I think one of our newest apps in the library would be very helpful for somebody who was into their hardiness zones and ecosystems. And that's the Eco Regions app. Um, that combines, I'll be nerdy for just a second, that combines the EPA Level 3 ecoregions with the USDA plant hardiness zones all in one map. And the layers can be toggled on and off. So you can either just look at your plant hardiness zone, or if you really want to know more, you can toggle the ecoregions on by itself, or I like to look at them together. So, so why do you need this? Well, I didn't know we needed this. This is another interesting story. uh, Kathy, you know Cynthia B., another of our colleagues out in Utah.
Mhm.
And I just think this is uh, such a good example of the importance of networking and talking to other people. And how the ecoregions app came about was that we were in a Facebook group together, and she was complaining that it's all fine and good to be in the same hardiness zone as someone else. But if you have a different soil or a different type of ecosystem, what kind of plants you can put there are not the same. So when you go to the ecoregions app, if you zoom in to where you live, you don't have to put your zip code in. All you have to do is zoom in to like where you live, and the more you zoom in, the fewer numbers that you're going to see. So that's what you want. And when you click on your location, say your town, the hardiness zone that you're in, and some towns are like in 3 hardiness zones, we have discovered. And then an outline of the ecoregion will also light up. And a pop-up will come up to take you to the ecoregions, the EPA's ecoregions list. And if you go there, it will tell you what kind of soils are there, what the climate is, what the native vegetation is, what type of hydrology you have, what type of terrain, what type of wildlife, and even previous land use. So if something was a farm in the past, or God forbid, brownfield or something like that, that's all going to be in there. And that what that does for folks is to give them a better handle on what type of plants to choose. Because you know, I this is from personal experience. You can choose plants that are hardy in your hardiness zone, but they don't grow well for you. And lots of times people think that they have a black thumb or a brown thumb because of that, but it can also be that you have a different soil. So,
Mhm.
you know, you don't want to put a rhododendron or an azalea in a limey soil. They
Hmm.
like acid soils. So that's one way that people at home can use the library. The very first the heart of the library though is the topics app. And what we have there is, you know, you go to our homepage, you click on the topics section, and we have a visual directory. So I know we're all familiar with the, not all of us, but the old card catalog in libraries, you know, where we had to dig through index cards. And now libraries have essentially transferred that information to an online type of format. But what we've done is put it in a visual format. So, you know, on beneficial insects, we have a picture of a bee. On farming and food, we have a guy on a tractor. You know, that type of thing where, you know, it's quick, it's easy. Each topic says what it is, and we're working ourselves up to 50 topics. Right now, we're, I think, at about 42 or something like that. So the content is divided up according to topics that were actually vetted by the sustainability committee at GardenComm. So, you know, what we asked them what they thought were the most important topics to be covering. So that's where we got those ideas. I've expanded on those a bit. And what people will find is, again, the hardiness zone and map pins that show where the collaborators, the folks that have supplied our information, where they're located. So you can go by zone. You know, if you're in zone 7 or zone 7B or 7A, there's a legend on the side that, you know, has the colors and tells you what zone each color is. And you just, you know, pick a map pin and see what that collaborator has. So in the DC area, some of our collaborators are American University Arboretum, Dumbarton Oaks, which you might not think would be, you know, appropriate, but they have some really interesting information about. I don't know if you had read about this, Kathy. They had an issue with runoff coming, you
Mhm.
know, down the mountain.
Oh, yeah, they're on such a steep slope, going down to Rock Creek Park. It's, you know, a very steep grade, and I've witnessed the erosion over the years, and I also saw their, you know, extensive repair project that they did and was impressed that they, you know, basically pulled back the whole garden to install that new system.
Right, and so they have some information about, you know, what the issue was and what they were doing to remedy it in our library. Um, and I, you know, for people like yourself, Kathy, I think it's a really good resource for starting stories and, you know, doing research and just finding interesting topics to cover. Is you know, especially like with the podcast, you're constantly looking for new information. Um,
Mhm.
some of the other places, other collaborators are University of Maryland Arboretum and Botanical Garden, and the U.S. Botanic Garden, the U.S. National Arboretum. And thank you for taking us to the Delaware Botanical Gardens at Pepper Creek on one of our GardenComm meetings. That's been a wonderful, wonderful resource for us. They were very happy to participate.
Great to hear that. And you referred to going back a little bit on your previous comment about how you could use that EPA zone map and narrow it down to just where you're growing and a little bit about the brownfields. I think I used that to check out our community garden, which is across the street because it used to be a HVAC business, and I suspected as much, and it did turn out to be a brownfield underneath that it was rated for that because
Oh,
it's also surrounded by auto mechanic shops for over 20 years, and of course, oil and gas spilling there. So I was very surprised. We, of course, amended the soil, and most people are growing in raised beds and that sort of thing, but it's still fascinating to find that out. And you wouldn't know that if you hadn't witnessed that. If I didn't know 20 years ago that that business was there, you would just come up across the community garden. So, same thing in your own home landscape when you were saying that it might not be your fault when a plant passes away, of course,
right.
because I've seen cases of previous owners soak their entire landscape in Roundup, like just kill everything and soak it into the soil. And then the new person comes in and moves in, and they're just, in tears because they can't figure out why everything they plant just immediately dies. So having at least some parts of that puzzle is a great resource.
Well, and it's so much more of a problem in urban areas. Here in New Jersey, we have so many Superfund sites, but I think one of our collaborators is Pittsburgh Botanic Garden, and I think that that's a good example of uh, an attempt to do not just remediation, but make something good out of something awful. I don't think I would particularly want to grow food plants there, but but they've done a lot of work at that location.
hmm And I think we actually need to dial it back a little bit further, Lois. And I realize let's define sustainability and
Ah,
some of those topics and principles, because sometimes the term sustainability gets confused with organic gardening or permaculture. And some of those could be part of sustainability, right? But it's not the entire definition of a sustainable garden or landscape.
oh, you're touching on my favorite topic. Well, my second favorite topic. My first favorite topic is stormwater management, but we won't go there unless you want to. um, so it's very simple to me, and I don't want to try to talk about the whole of sustainability, although my definition for sustainable gardening really does apply. And it's very simple. Everybody makes it so complicated. All it is using nature's resources without using them up. That's all it is. And if you think about pretty much every aspect of life, there's all kinds of complexities around this. We all want to move off of fossil fuel automobiles into electric, but you really have to ask yourself: is are lithium batteries any more sustainable than fossil fuel? I don't pretend to know the answer to that, but it's like you have to look at the whole picture.
Very true. And it does get so complicated. And I think that's what scares people away a bit from it. They're like, what is the better of two choices if neither choice is that great? You know,
Right.
and how can we rank them and how can we evaluate it for themselves? They would love to have the answers readily in front of them.
Well, that's part of the service that the Sustainable Gardening Library provides. Not in the Delmarva area, but we have a collaborator in Connecticut. The Extension Service up there has an extensive collection of information, all for the home gardener. Another one that does that is the Barnegat Bay Partnership by the Jersey Shore, which for those of us that live in the more northerly part of the mid Atlantic, um, they have plant lists by region of the state, physiographic region of the state. So, yeah, uh, people can find that's one of the things that I think people really look for is plant lists. And almost all of, I'd say probably 80%, 75 to 80% of our collaborators have plant lists. And some of them are very extensive. Um, uh, University of Maryland Arboretum, for example, has native plant lists and native plant lists for shade and pollinator planting lists in the library. So, whether you have sun, whether you have shade, or whether you're looking for pollinators, you can find that information in our library, um, under the appropriate category like native plants or beneficial insects.
Hmm. And so, because we have listeners all over the world, I love the fact that you're sourcing local sources. Is it only the United States, or is it all of North America into Canada, or is it international?
Well, our original vision for it, and we're still working on this, is I would love for it to be worldwide. Australia is very into sustainable gardening and agriculture and sustainability in general, and they're big promoters of permaculture. So, yeah, we're currently working on trying to recruit one of the gardens in Vancouver.
Nice. And anybody, of course, anywhere they are, can access it online, but it just wouldn't be that they might not find a local source to them. Do you have any gaps in the United States map that you're looking to fill in too?
Well, we have a lot on both coasts, and a lot of how we can get people to participate is the culture of the area. So we have a very large number of collaborators in the Seattle area. We're pretty densely covered in the state of Washington, in and around Seattle. And I was excited to. We're just going to be bringing on board soon our first water utility. Seattle Public Utilities has a rainwater management program for homeowners. Well, we have 1/3 of all the content providers are in the New York to Virginia area. So we have, like 102 or 105, something like that. So, like, pretty much we've covered the Midwest. Certain parts of the Midwest, we could use a few more collaborators. Um, the Southwest and the mountain areas. But part of the issue there is you know, Montana doesn't have, I think they have like one or two public gardens
Mm.
and only a couple of colleges. So the pool of collaborating content providers that we can pull from is very small in certain parts of the country. And, in the Rockies, there's not a lot of, there's nature and the environment, but there's not a lot of population. So, um, but what we decided to do was, go with the people who were interested in us right away, and then we're going to kind of move in from the coasts and fill in the missing blanks, as it were, over time.
Hmm. So obviously, most of your partners are public gardens and research institutions like colleges and universities. But are there any private companies or corporations that are part of it?
No, and the reason for that is goes all the way back to our original survey with then Garden Writers Association, and we did a survey and asked members. We had a whole list of groups to choose from who they felt were the most trustworthy providers of this type of information, and public gardens and universities were neck and neck. at about 81%. And then I was very surprised that government agencies was next in line at about, somewhere around 65, 70%. And then everybody else was so far below that, below 50%, that we just felt that that wasn't viable at the time. And, you know, commercial enterprises have a vested interest. We want objective information to be, to be giving out to people. And it doesn't mean that people aren't doing good work. It just means that they're not appropriate candidates for the library. And I can point to one one that I'm aware of. Kashi, the cereal, has a program for farmers
Hmm.
that it's a very difficult process to be certified organic for a farmer. It's very expensive, and it takes at least 3 years to accomplish. And a lot of smaller farmers who are the ones that want to be organic can't afford that. And so Kashi has established a program for them, that's a transitional certification. So it means they're working their way towards their organic certification, but they don't have it yet. So it's a good program, but it's not appropriate content for us.
Hmm. Right, interesting. Oh, I think it's Kashi, Kashi
I
cereals.
think it's Kaishi.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I clearly don't eat that product.
I'm
Haven't stared at that cereal box on the table in front of me.
Yeah, I could be wrong on the spelling, but
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, I've seen them around in some of their green programs. I think they're fellow members of Green America, that is a green certification program that I'm in as well.
mhm.
So let's turn to what the home gardener could do to garden sustainably, and maybe even how some of those practices can help solve some of our environmental issues or affect climate change.
Wow, that's a lot to cover. I think there are programs that have been around for a long time, like green alleyways in the Midwest, Chicago and Minneapolis, I think, or at least someplace in Minnesota has had a program like that in the past. And what that is, in older parts of towns and cities, there are these alleyways where the garages were all behind the houses were all built along a lane.
Hmm.
And over time, particularly, people's cars no longer fit in those small garages and start parking on the street. And, oil and other pollutants come off the cars and wash into the street and then get carried into the stormwater sewers and then into the rivers and so on and so forth. And some of these programs help homeowners either by helping them to design or helping them pay to have the alleyways be made more green through tearing up the old concrete and putting in permeable paving and suitable plants and where necessary making bioswales and uh, rainwater gardens and so forth. Another example of that is planned communities. I forget the name of it, Applegate or something like that, near Longwood, um, is a planned community where uh, the there's a lot of open space behind the houses that's kept in a meadow, and there's a walking part of the meadow is mowed so that people can walk through it, but it's basically an open space, an open community space, and those are the types of things that people can do themselves. If you live in an established community, get together with your homeowners association or with your neighbors if you're not in an association, and try to plan so that a small section of everyone's garden is given over, to some type of sustainable landscaping. People love pollinators, and you know, a, a lot of the plants that pollinators love are colorful and flowers that many people already want to have in their garden. And the idea is just to make mini greenways through your neighborhood. Every little bit helps. If a million people give over, a 12 square foot area or a 20 square foot area of their garden, it each one individually is not so much, but
Hmm.
all together we can accomplish something. And I think so many people are, despairing that, what can I do? There's nothing I can do. This is such a big problem. Well, you can do something.
I love that. I especially like that, kind of those campaigns where every school child gives a penny and then that becomes millions, that each of us can do a little something. And I totally agree, Lois, especially on the pollinator plants that are so beloved by the pollinators most are the ones that we love too. Because I
Right.
think there's something in our Jungian brain that we're all, why are we attracted to these flowers? We're not pollinators. Why do we love the sense of them so much too? That fragrance and that beautiful color, it doesn't really make sense on the human level of why we're so obsessed with roses and peonies and those sorts of things, or lotuses and water lilies, but we are.
Right. Right. So another thing that people can do, and I know rain barrels are like old hat at this point, but you don't have to use a rain barrel. You can direct the runoff from your roof, into a garden. It doesn't necessarily have to be a rain garden. These are not difficult things to start. And I think you had said in your book, Groundcover Revolution, to start small.
Hmm.
And that's the what I would recommend with sustainability. If you can afford to, and if you have the motivation to, uh, yes, you could rip out everything and start over. But I'm not a purist. I enjoy my exotic plants as much as anybody, but I work around. We live in the woods here, so there's already a lot of native vegetation, and we add to those things as we can, and as the spirit moves us. But there's cone flowers and black-eyed Susans and cardinal flowers and um, not the invasive type of honeysuckle, uh, which we seem to be blessed with an abundant amount of the invasive type, but so we're always hacking it back. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And that was really the motivation behind the Sustainable Gardening Library. Um, we recognize that people exist along a spectrum, from not sustainable at all to totally zero, net zero energy, net zero this, net zero that, and people that are extreme at both ends. We're trying to do is move people from being less sustainable to being more sustainable. And the library is a tool to help them move along that continuum.
Hmm. Such a great point. And I love that it's not all or nothing. You're either sustainable or you're not. You're working your way, right? You're working your way towards full sustainability, but it's always going to be a process.
Well, Kathy, no garden is truly sustainable because when the gardener dies or
Mm.
moves, the garden stops.
Hmm.
It's an artificial. Gardens are artificial constructs that people take plants from here and there and arrange them in the way that they want. And when the gardener is gone, over time, if left alone, you're going to have a succession of natural plants come in and start taking over. Hopefully, not invasives.
Hmm. And yeah, you could make a sustainability plan, a succession plan, so to speak, for your own garden as well.
Sure. Yes, definitely.
Yep. But yeah, I do take your point that, the second you stop weeding, you stop maintaining, then it starts to rewild, but maybe not in the way that you'd like it to rewild.
Right. And I
Hmm.
think that's worse in urban and suburban areas where there's not such a seed bank
Hmm.
existing in the ground of native plants as there once was.
Yep. Yeah, you can't do the burn clearing in an urban area for many reasons. And then what's gonna come back is not gonna be a whole field of Virginia bluebells, say. It's probably gonna be a lot of that, invasive honeysuckle, from
Right.
my experience. But, um, so let's talk about some final thoughts. So if you were a new homeowner, new gardener, just moved into a place and you were starting from scratch, what advice would you give them?
Do nothing. Wait a whole year because you don't know what's there. I've seen this happen so many times where, and it's understandable. You got a new house, whether it's a new to you house, and you want to get out there and get going, but wait and see. A good example is this time of the year. Bulbs are popping up. Maybe they're already finished down by you, but um, you're not going to know that if you start digging everything up in the middle of the summer or the fall, before the bulbs have a chance to appear. So, and perennials the same thing. Some perennials die so far back to the ground that you can't really see that there's been a plant there. Peonies, I think, are a good example of that. Not a native plant, but nevertheless, many people have them in their gardens, and just wait to see what happens. You might get some really nice surprises there.
Mhm. Yeah, and you can be really blessed by what that former homeowner or gardener did there.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Lois, for sharing some sustainable gardening practices for homeowners and home gardeners and telling us about all the resources available to them at the sustainable, if I can say that, sustainable gardening library. How can people contact you and how can they find out more?
Well, they can find the library at www.sustainablegardeninglibrary.org or just Google Sustainable Gardening Library. And our companion website is the Sustainable Gardening Institute, the sustainablegardeninginstitute.org. And there's contact pages or menus on both of those sites. So um, I won't try to give you my email because it's so long. But it's Elder Vries at sustainablegardeninglibrary.org if you want to try that. Excuse me, sustainablegardeninginstitute.org.
Hmm. And we'll have a link up to the Institute and the library on this podcast in the notes. So thank you again, Lois, for sharing and for being part of the Garden DC podcast.
It's been a pleasure, Kathy. Thank you so much.
Want to make your own podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So, no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since I discovered Spotify for podcasters, I feel like I have more options, and with Q&A and polls, it lets me be more creative with the GardenDC podcast. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Golden Ragwort plant profile. Golden Ragwort, Pachyra aurea, is also known as senecio, golden groundsel, butterweed, false valerian, coughweed, and squawweed. Golden Ragwort has bright green glossy foliage that hugs the ground and stays evergreen in mild climates. In the spring, it sends up stems between a foot or two high that have black buds at the tip. These buds soon open to reveal golden yellow daisy-like flowers that last for several weeks. The basal foliage spreads along the ground and forms a dense ground cover. It will naturalize in moist areas and self-sow around the garden, if you let it. To curtail that, get out your pruners and deadhead the flowers at the base once the blooms are finished. Although part of this plant's charms are the puffs of spent flowers and its seed head. While it prefers moist soils, it will tolerate drier conditions as well as occasional flooding. Divide golden ragwort in the spring. Other than that, it is maintenance-free. The flowers are attractive to bees and butterflies, and like most aster family members, golden ragwort is deer and rabbit resistant. It is untroubled by most pets and is practically disease-free. Golden ragwort, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, my Carolina Allspice shrub is blooming away and the fragrance is fantastic. Over at the community garden plot, the Yukon Gold potatoes I had planted a month ago are starting to pop above the surface, and so I am looking forward to a nice crop of potatoes by the end of this summer. In local gardening news, we have some upcoming events to tell you about, including the FONA Garden Fair on Saturday, April 29th from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., and that is put on by the Friends of the National Arboretum on the grounds of the U.S. National Arboretum in Washington, D.C. There are vendors and activities for the whole family from 9 to 4, but the plant sale itself is limited from 9 to 11 a.m. to FONA members only. And yes, you can join at the door if you want to have access early into that plant sale. Then after 11 a.m., it is open to the public. And it's free to attend the event. It's rain or shine, and you can find out more details at FONA.org. That's FONA.org. Another plant sale to look out for is Saturday, May 6th from 9 a.m. to 12 noon. The Beltsville Garden Club plant sale is taking place in the Roosevelt parking lot, Centerway in Greenbelt, Maryland. That is also rain or shine, and the details for that are at beltsvillegardenclub.org. A garden tour that I highly recommend is the Shepherd Park Garden Tour on Sunday, May 7th from 2 to 5 p.m. This is a self-guided walking tour that showcases beautiful landscapes in the Shepherd Park Colonial Village and North Portal Estates neighborhoods of Washington, D.C. There's unique gardens of various styles. The tickets are $15 per person, and you can find out more about that at shepherdpark.org and look for the annual garden tour tab. And then finally on Saturday, May 13th at 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. is the GardenMart plant sale hosted by the Silver Spring Garden Club. That's their annual plant sale fundraiser, and near and dear to my heart as I am president of the Silver Spring Garden Club, and that's our biggest event of the year. It takes place at Brookside Gardens in Wheaton, Maryland at the Visitor Center on the outside terrace to the right of the main entrance, and you can find out more details about that at silverspringgardenclub.com. Happy gardening!
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with the new book Groundcover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional, everyday grass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million American adults converted part of the lawn to a natural landscape, and now are looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn is knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Groundcover Revolution is here with all the answers you need. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Author Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the details on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Groundcover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Available at bookstores now and also at Quarto.com, where you can get 30% off using discount code GARDENING30. In the new book, The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Teri Speight, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space while also making a lush outdoor living area you'll crave spending time in. Whether you're growing edible plants or beautiful flowers, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Good day, everybody. It's Dr. A back in the garden with the last word. Well, today's last word from Dr. A is about some people I met this weekend. I had a wonderful garden exchange here where people came to the garden. There were hundreds of people for our annual tour of gardens in our little town of Athens, Georgia, and they just love this stuff. And I know in my garden I got to talking about all the cool plants, and I have a lot of cool color. I worked at the trial gardens for a long time at the University of Georgia, and oh boy, the annuals that we displayed were spectacular. And I even had a few, even though it was very early, I even had a few out here in my garden. And didn't I meet people who just thought that annuals were beneath them? I mean, really, this is gardening. And gardening by its very definition includes trees and shrubs and perennials and annuals. And oh boy, they were annual snobs. They just thought a marigold was the worst thing ever. And who in the right word would actually grow zinnias? I mean, zinnias were grandmother's plants and we're way above that. Well, let me tell you, as I told them, that the breeding on annuals and color is spectacular. I mean, 10 years ago, we never heard of a calibrachoa or a scaevola, ever. And now they're commonplace in all landscapes, and commonplace means successful. So I had to have a few words with these people, but the few words I had, I hope were encouraging. Gardening is for everything and for every plant that you can have some success with. I mean, goodness, now that we have bred impatience, so they're not susceptible to downy mildew, I have impatiens in all my shady areas. I have impatiens beside native plants that are perennial. So there is no such thing as a bad plant in the garden. Only a bad gardener who doesn't realize that there are some great plants out there. I love gardeners, I love plants, and I have a little trouble with snobs. Don't get me started on taxonomic snobs, but those who look their nose down on annuals simply aren't smelling well. This is Dr. A with the last word on annual snobs But let's have fun. Let's go garden.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. You can become a listener supporter for as little as 99 cents a month by going to anchor.fm/GardenDC/support. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com. Thank you. You can find Washington Gardener online at WashingtonGardener.com, on Twitter at WDC Gardener, on Instagram at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook.com at Washington Gardener Magazine.